Emerging from the mists of time, the land was a dark and mysterious place. A place known as part of Ultima Thule, at the end of the earth. The peoples of this unknown land, eventually in 844 AD, became one kingdom through common faith and common danger. This new kingdom, called Alba, gradually extended its borders southwards, and in 1018 AD, this newborn nation was welded together under the leadership of King Malcolm II and became known as Scotland. Caledonia, stern and wild, meet nurse for poetic child, land of brown heath and shaggy wood, land of mountain and stream. Even as the visitor to Scotland arrives, at one of the 3 international and transatlantic airports, Glasgow in the west, Prestwick in the southwest, and Edinburgh, Scotland's capital, in the east, it immediately becomes apparent that even in these highly efficient hubs of modern-day communication and travel, one has arrived in a land with a unique culture, which perhaps stems from the Scots' inborn need to travel and explore, where any visitor from any country is immediately made welcome with a hospitality and friendliness that is alone Scottish. These Scottish airports are ideally placed for further travel, being only a matter of a few hours from the capitals of France, Germany, and the rest of Central Europe, but still ideally situated in the heartland of Scotland, offering us the perfect setting to commence the grand tour. Glasgow, Scotland's most populated city, once the epitome of an industrial town, has now turned full circle to be a foremost centre for the arts. Glasgow has much to offer the discerning, with its cathedral, public squares, and museums. Though perhaps more than anything, it is the people themselves, with their unique social culture shaped from the hard industrial past, that makes the warm generosity of Glasgow and the Glaswegian renowned throughout the world. A traveller could find no better place to relax and savour the city, therefore, than at Rogano, the oldest surviving restaurant in Glasgow. Sitting amidst its Art Deco style, reminiscent of the glorious days of the famous Cunard liner built here in Glasgow, the Queen Mary, dinner is served. For over half a century, the chefs here have dedicated themselves to preparing and serving the finest seafood in the world, taken from Scottish waters, to be enjoyed by the visitor and native Glaswegian alike. Literally, a taste of Scotland. It was here in Ayrshire, which lies to the southwest of Glasgow, in the small village of Alloway, that on the 25th of January 1759, the man who was to become Scotland's national bard and most celebrated poet was born, Robert Burns. The tiny thatched cottage where he was born and spent his formative years now acts as a museum to his memory. His varied life as a farmer, an exciseman, a romantic, and a great socializer inspired many of his famous works. In one of his favourite hostelries, he would spend many a pleasant evening relaxing and passing the time with characters such as Suitor Johnny and Tam O'Shanter, whom he included in some of his famous verses. Burns also wrote Auld Lang Syne, probably one of his best-known works, whilst working as an exciseman in the town of Dumfries on the Solway coast. It was in Dumfries that he died in 1796 at the age of 37, leaving a wondrous legacy of song and verse to the world. As we travel from the southwest into the border country of the Tweed Valley, the Wizard of the North begins to cast his influence over the rolling Eildon Hills. Trimontium, so called by the Romans during their brief occupation of Scotland. Folklore implies that there is a vault beneath, where King Arthur and his knights lie awaiting a trumpet call to action. Sir Walter Scott once said of the Eildon Hills, "From atop, I can see 43 places of war and verse." Scott, the Wizard of the North, was already a celebrated author when he bought a farmhouse called Clartyhole on the banks of the River Tweed, and there he began work on his Waverley novels, stories of adventure and romance. The books brought him such fame and fortune that in 1820 he rebuilt the farmhouse in pseudo-monastic, pseudo-baronial style and called his new house Abbotsford. The house is still occupied by the female line of descendants, the Maxwell Scotts, who take great delight in showing the many visitors around the house its grounds and gardens. Sir Walter, on his many carriage trips around his much-loved border country, would stop at his favourite spot, high on a hill, and view the land of the abbeys, Melrose and Dryborough. Scott was buried in the grounds of historic Dryborough Abbey, having died peacefully at Abbotsford on a most beautiful, quiet day in 1832, no doubt dreaming of his travels and his encounters with the other famous dignitaries of the age. Nowadays, though, with the Tweed being one of the finest salmon rivers in Scotland, it's only natural that visitors flock to this area, not only for the magnificent scenery, but to pursue the noble sport of game fishing. When in season, this river offers the angler truly unmatched sport and seclusion, and where even the novice is catered for, as in the course run by this hotel near Walkerburn on the art of fly fishing, where, after coaching, many a visitor's passion for the sport and this area's beauty is spawned for a lifetime. The River Tweed gently flows towards the coast and enters the North Sea quietly on the Berwickshire coast. To the north, sitting between the estuaries of the Forth and Tay, lies the Kingdom of Fife. A kingdom indeed. Throughout history, Fife has had royal connections from the days of Malcolm Canmore and his lovely queen, Margaret. Within Dunfermline Abbey, they had a small palace and were buried there in 1093, sharing the same resting place as King Robert the Bruce. There are, in fact, a total of 15 royal graves within the walls of this historic abbey. Eastwards, within the shadow of the Lomond Hills, is Castle Island, set in the centre of Loch Leven. Mary, Queen of Scots, was held captive within its grey walls for 11 months, between 1567 and 68. The Queen, however, made a daring escape with the help of young Willie Douglas, a friend of the jailer's son. When the Queen was safely away, Willie Douglas, showing his defiance, threw the keys of the castle into the dark waters of the loch. Falkland Palace, A royal palace, set in Fife's pleasant landscape, was the favourite home of the Stuarts for over 300 years, and extended and improved by James V before his death in 1542. Falkland was used frequently as a base for Mary Queen of Scots on her trips into the countryside to hunt the monarch of the glens, the Scottish stag. The importance of this most majestic of animals is reflected today by organisations such as the Scottish Deer Centre, based here in Cooper, where the centre protects and perpetuates the bloodlines of these magnificent beasts for our wondrous enjoyment and for the heritage of future generations. A visit to Fife, however, would not be complete without a look at the East Neuk, with its villages of Largo, St Monans, Pittenweem and Crail, darkened by the shrubbery of masts and rigging of their fishing fleets. The diminutive houses, crowded below steep wynds, hug around their stone-built harbours, reminding of a bygone age when the fleets followed the shoals of silver darlings, the herring. On around the coast of Fife Ness, we arrive at St Andrews, the home of golf. Records of the game suggest the old course dates back before the 15th century. Gentlemen of the town would meet through their common interest in the game, and in 1754, the Royal and Ancient Golf Club was born. The Royal and Ancient took over the running of the Open and Amateur Championship in 1919, and is, with common consent, the ruling authority on golf throughout most of the world. The golf links are actually on public land, and on payment of a small fee, the courses can be played by anyone of suitable handicap, even the old course itself. The University of St Andrews is the oldest university in Scotland, founded in 1411, and students from all over the world are educated within its 3 colleges. The cathedral, once the largest in Scotland, dedicated in 1318, sits alongside the castle, and both sit impressively above the harbour, built from the stones of the ruins. And just a stone's throw from St Andrews lies the ancient village of Luchers, which has one of the earliest surviving Norman churches in Scotland. And keeping an ever-watchful eye on the village is Earl's Hall Castle, truly a jewel in the kingdom of Fife's crown. The castle was constructed in 1546 by Sir William Bruce, a lineal descendant of Robert the Bruce, and is still today the family seat, and perhaps owes its unique character and beauty in being one of the few ancient castles to have escaped the attention of succeeding generations, leaving this majestic residence unchanged and unspoilt for the enjoyment of us all. In its peaceful rural setting, Earl's Hall offers the visitor all that is best in Scotland. The gardens of this fine castle extend to approximately 3 acres, split between orchard and formal gardens, with each part divided by holly and yew hedging, and contain a quite amazing array of beautiful flowers and shrubs, with perhaps the most famous feature being the topiaried yews that stand elegant yet commanding amongst this truly beautiful Scottish backdrop. Popular mythology has it that the yews are shaped as chessmen, but they're actually laid out to form 4 saltires or diagonal crosses. But as you gently wander around these fine gardens, a sense of timelessness must surely come upon you. And as you enter the castle itself, it immediately becomes apparent that you've been transported to another age, another time. The steep, mysterious, winding stairways lead the visitor from one treasure to another. The renowned Long Gallery, with its magnificent coved painted ceiling, which measures over 50 feet in length. The ceiling depicts the coats of arms of the principal families of Scotland, interspersed with fabulous and mythological beasts. The walls in this great chamber are flanked with over 150 Scottish basket-hilted broadswords, memorable of a more violent past. However, here too one can see the Linkett Hearts symbol, incorporating the initials of Sir William Bruce, the great-grandson of the castle's builder, and his wife, Dame Agnes Lindsay, showing perhaps in this one great room a true insight into the Scots' proud, warlike, and yet touchingly romantic character. It's easy to imagine in this regal setting how Mary Queen of Scots must have felt when visiting Earl's Hall in 1561. And perhaps it's not too fanciful to imagine Mary looking out from her bedroom window across the gardens after a day's hunting, as she changed from her riding habit to a grander gown for her dinner in the Long Gallery. The tradition of having a banquet in the Long Gallery still survives today, and many visitors' groups are entertained here with typically Scottish flair. What makes a banquet at Earl's Hall particularly special is that the Baron and Baroness actually take time to personally greet all their guests at these functions, perhaps as their ancestor Sir William Bruce might have done, way back in the 16th century. This showing of friendship and meeting of cultures in fine and truly hospitable surroundings make a visit to historic Earl's Hall Castle a memory that no visitor will ever forget. The broad, swirling cauldron of the River Tay separates Fife from the gentle, rolling landscapes of Strathmore and the Sidlaw Hills, within whose forests of deciduous and evergreen trees, teeming with wildlife, we approach Glamis Castle, seat of the Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn. No other castle in Scotland can match the legends of its many ghosts, including that of the Grey Lady Janet Douglas, who still roams the castle corridors, or that of the secret chamber said to be located within the thickness of the crypt walls. It's said that within this room, one of the Lords of Glamis and the Earl of Crawford played cards with the devil on the Sabbath, to their grave consequence. Glamis was also the childhood home of the present Queen Mother, and the birthplace of the present-day Princess Margaret, born within the castle in 1930, the first royal princess to be born in Scotland for over 300 years. To the north, amidst a breathtaking vista of hills, rivers and forest, we can imagine a witch's scene, predicting death and disaster. The woods of Burnham, where Malcolm assembled his army to avenge the murder of his father, King Duncan, by Macbeth. And set in this vista, we find Pitlochry, with its turreted hotels, and its Theatre of the Hills, encouraging the visitor to stay a while and enjoy its sense of relaxation. The hydroelectric dam across the river provides vibrant electric power to the town and the surrounding area. Up this disgorged water torrent, the wild salmon fight their way up the Tay and the Tummel to this concrete barrier. But man in his wisdom has created a watery staircase to allow the noble fish to pass the dam and reach the spawning grounds in the mountain burns. The Pass of Killiecrankie. the scene of a bloody battle between the Scots and the government forces of General Mackay. The battle was won in the Jacobite cause by Graham of Claverhouse, Bonnie Dundee. Sadly, he was killed in his moment of victory. Nearby, in all its glory, sits Blair Castle, amidst the rolling foothills of its 135,000-acre estate, home to His Grace, the Duke of Atholl. The castle in its present state was largely rebuilt with monies received from the British government in return for sovereignty over the Isle of Man. On this visit, we're lucky enough to witness the parading of the famous Atholl Highlanders, the only surviving private army in Europe, officially recognized by Queen Victoria in 1844 and still mustered to this very day. The castle and its estates also plays annual host to probably Scotland's most famous event, the Highland Games. These events bring locals and visitors alike together in one glorious day of sport, dance and music, pageant and revelry. Events are featured like throwing the stane, Highland dancing, and sword dancing, and of course, tossing the caber. They make a day at these gatherings a memory never to be forgotten. And although competition and pride run fiercely throughout every event, nothing ever stands in the way of comradeship at these, the most friendly of games. With the revelry lasting well into the wee sma' hours, we bid a fond farewell and continue our journey over the mountains and glens to Royal Deeside. Royal Deeside, stretching from Braemar in the Cairngorms down the river to Ballater. Queen Victoria, on her frequent visits to Scotland, fell in love with this area and acquired this estate, which was to become the royal family's holiday home in Scotland. The royal castle on Deeside is Balmoral, with its turreted roof reaching upwards in mutual harmony with its surrounding pine woods. On his frequent clandestine visits, Prince Charles is often seen pursuing his favourite pastime, matching his skill against the wily salmon in the deep pools of the Dee. The River Dee runs to its estuary at the city and port of Aberdeen, within whose harbours the ferries and supply boats start their sea journeys to the north to the group of islands called Orkney and Shetland. From the fishing villages of the Banffshire coast, the River Spey winds back inland through pleasant farmland to Aviemore, resting peacefully in the shadow of the Blue Mountains, the Cairngorms. Aviemore plays host to the hill walker, the water sports enthusiast, and appeals to the outdoor types who can pursue their favourite activity within the massive estates of the Glenmore Forest Park, and the mountains, which when covered with snow can give the skier many exhilarating downhill runs in the virgin snows. The village itself was unremarkable, with only its railway station and a few houses and private hotels, until in 1960, when with considerable foresight the village was transformed by the building of a multi-million-pound all-year sports and leisure holiday complex. It has continued to grow, but now boasts facilities such as an ice rink, swimming pools, theatre concert hall, dry ski slope, and many others within its plaza and hotels. Nearby at Kingussie, the village affords a Highland folk museum, featuring an insight to the past in the form of a traditional black house, so called because of the soot build-up inside the thatch of its roof, where a hole served as a chimney. Speeding up the A9 on the new fast road, its route allows breathtaking views. South to the Cairngorms. East towards the plains of the fertile Spey Valley. And west over the Monolith Mountains. Traversing through the Slocht Pass at a height of 405 metres and down into the town of Inverness. Casting our gaze over to the northeast, we see the infamous Culloden Moor. Here on this desolate site, on the grey, stormy morning of April the 16th, 1746, Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, as flamboyant and confident as ever, deployed his army of some 5,000 Highlanders to challenge the might of King George II's well-disciplined troops. This force of over 9,000 better equipped and well-trained regulars was to be more than a match for the Highland clansmen. The Duke of Cumberland, standing atop a massive rock, directed a cannonade into the midst of the ranks of the Highlanders, immediately following with a fearsome bayonet attack, continually enticing his men to murderous action in the killing of some 1,200 clansmen, including the wounded and prisoners. The ghosts of these gallant men, who had given their lives for their prince and their faith, still linger over the memorial that marks their graves alongside the site of the last battle to be fought on the British mainland. Not far from this battlefield lie mysterious standing stones dating back to about 1800 BC. A Bronze Age site of standing stones and cairns. The Clara stones show a culture that was here long before history was written. Similar sites can also be found further to the north in Sutherland and on the shores of the Pentland Firth at the northern edge of the Scottish mainland. The visitor can only wonder as to the power and mysticism contained within the circular remains of these striking constructions. Inverness, with its new Keswick Bridge, is the gateway to the north. But now we travel westwards along the Caledonian Canal to Loch Ness, where, since the beginning of recorded history, there has been a legend relating to encounters with the Loch Ness Monster, since St. Columba, on his journey through the Highlands, was said to have saved a Pict from being consumed in the year 565 AD, and also that the water horse had towed his boat across the waters of the Ness, and therefore was granted perpetual freedom. Throughout history, there have been numerous stories told of this monster, thought, through description, to be a reptile-type creature that resembles a plesiosaurus, a Jurassic marine reptile. Ever since the new road along the West Bank was opened in 1933, more stories have emerged, photographs taken, but still the mystery continues and proves to be far more exciting than perhaps a final solution. Monsters apart, the loch sits astride a geological fault and is over 24 miles long, the longest in Great Britain, and reaches depths of over 750 feet. The impressive ruin sitting above the loch is that of an old Clan Grant stronghold, Urquhart Castle, one of the largest fortresses in Scotland. It was actually razed by the Grants themselves to prevent the fortress becoming a Jacobite stronghold. No one could fail to be moved by the grandeur and ruggedness of this last great wilderness. This northwestern part of Scotland is a lovely area with its stark moors, hills and lochs, blue seas and golden sandy beaches that can be enjoyed in near privacy. The crofter here is a hardy, quiet breed, and he must be a fisherman and farmer and be able to turn his hand to artistic crafts to supplement his meagre income. However, this northwestern land is an ecological paradise, pollution-free. Thus, for the town dweller, offers the purest tranquility. Looking out from this lonely and isolated coast, we see in the distance Skye, the island of mist and legend, brought into history and romance by the unselfish actions of a young heroine by the name of Flora MacDonald, who rode her bonny prince across the sea to Skye after his insulting defeat at Culloden, so ending the Jacobite fight to restore the Stuarts to the throne of Scotland. Flora lived to a mature age and is buried in Kilmuir on Skye. A name that will be mentioned in history, and if courage and fidelity are virtues, mentioned with honour. Dr. Johnson was probably most responsible for popularising Skye, when, accompanied by his friend James Boswell, he visited the island 30 years later, praising its landscapes, seascapes, and the hospitality of its natives. The black rocks of the stark Cuillin Hills on the southwest of the island sit majestically looking out to sea, but their sheer beauty is misleading, for these dark hills still claim the lives of the unwary mountaineer caught off guard. The Garden of Skye at Armadale looks over the Sound of Sleat to the mainland and the port of Mallaig, probably the busiest fish market on the west coast. Mallaig is served by a rail link to connect it with the main line at Fort William. A trip on this West Highland line could turn out to be a journey of a lifetime on a train pulled by a steam locomotive. Travelling to the east through the unspoilt countryside, passing again through Bonnie Prince Charlie country at Arisaig, where a cave served as home for the young prince whilst awaiting the arrival of a French ship to bear him away from his beloved land. A few miles to the east stands the statue of the kilted Highlander, looking down Loch Shiel at Glenfinnan, to commemorate the raising of the standard at the beginning of Prince Charles Edward Stuart's campaign, which sadly ended in the same area in which it started. The train travels on past Loch Shiel, Loch Eel and Corpach, crossing the Caledonian Canal to arrive at Fort William. Fort William, touring centre for Lochaber district. It lies in the shadows at the foot of the 4,406-foot bulk of Britain's highest mountain, Ben Nevis. Best viewed from a position near the Commando Memorial at Spian Bridge, in the middle of the moors at the entrance to the Great Glen, which cleaves its way east along the geological fault to Inverness. Fort William is now predominantly a tourist town, with many hotels. Original and modern, it offers the traveller a place to rest, replenish and relax. Looking east from the natural barrier of Loch Leven at Ballachulish into the Glen of Weeping, we are reminded that it was here in Glencoe that in the early hours of a cold February morning in 1692, government forces led by Robert Campbell of Glenlyon, having just spent several days enjoying the hospitality of the MacDonalds, slaughtered some 40 of their kindly hosts. This action was ordered because the chieftain of the MacDonald clan was accused of failing to give up the Jacobite cause and swear allegiance to King William III. During this dreaded deed, the hamlets were burnt to the ground, and, exposed to the snows of Glencoe, many of the MacDonald clan perished on that dark, cold night. Rivalry still exists between the clans to this very day. Robert Louis Stevenson was so fascinated and inspired by this infamous place that he included it in his novel Kidnapped. Travelling south and upwards through this lonely glen, the country of clan feuds and mysterious happenings, we appreciate the importance of civilization when we arrive at Tyndrum, a junction of road and railway links to the south and the west. Going west, we pass beneath 3,000-foot peaks, on through the pass of Brander and Loch Awe, past Dumstaffnage Castle, and into the town of Oban. The famous Caledonian MacBrayne ferries leave here for the Western Isles, including Barra, the island where the SS Politician floundered and sunk, giving Sir Compton Mackenzie the idea for his book Whisky Galore. The unfinished replica of the Colosseum of Rome, known as McCaig's Folly, overlooks the town. A local banker and businessman intended it to become a museum and art gallery as a memorial to his family name. Unfortunately, in his passion, he bankrupted himself. Looking west from McCaig's Folly across the island of Carrera and the Firth of Lorne, the island of Mull comes into view through the haze. Across the island of Mull and a short ferry crossing brings us to Iona, the island where St. Columba chose to site his monastery in 563 AD. It was from here he and his monks spread Christianity throughout Scotland and the north of England. And it is here in the burial plots many Dark Age kings lie, 48 of them from Scotland, making a visit to this island almost a pilgrimage. From the mainland, we head south and on to Inverary, a pristine white-walled town looking out to the deep blue waters of Loch Fyne. Surrounded by some of the loveliest woodlands in Scotland, Inverary has been the headquarters of the Clan Campbell for nearly 6 centuries. The present castle was built on the demolished site of the old town between 1746 and 1780. The clan chieftain carries the title Duke of Argyll. Dr. Johnson was entertained by the Duke of Argyll, and it was here that the famous lexicographer had his first taste of the famous Scotch whisky. Around this area the lochs are deeper, the hills are steeper, and the landscape more compressed, and it's over one of these steep hills that we must go, through the pass called the Rest and Be Thankful. Past the Cobbler, and down the deep Loch Long at Arrochar, through the compressed landscape to reach Tarbet on the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. The Queen of Scottish Lochs is the largest inland waterway in Great Britain and stretches from Ardluey in the north to Barach in the south. The wooded hills to the northeast rise dramatically into the lofty peaks of Ben Lomond and Ben Vrachie, standing like sentinels guarding their precious queen. A trip on one of the many pleasure craft takes you amongst the islands scattered across the waters, some heavily wooded, some sparse and green. It was possible that on one of these islands the illicit stills first produced what has now become Scotland's best-known product, Usquebae, the water of life, whisky. The art of producing whisky has come a long way since the days of the illicit still. Nowadays, distillers using traditional methods hand in hand with modern practices each produce to their own well-guarded recipes malts, grains and blended whiskies to suit even the most delicate palate. Near Loch Lomond in the Campsie Hills, in its own wee glen, Glengoyne Distillery, using only the best malted barley and the clear, sparkling, pure burn water from its own supply, produces a single malt whose soft, mellow flavour allows it to stand alongside the very best in Scotch whisky. Travelling around this area and not far from Loch Lomond, the visitor, we're in no doubt, will wish a place to rest and relax, to savour the beauty and spectacle of this region. Typically Scottish and not all that far from each other, these country inns at Balloch, Rue, and Killearn offer modern facilities and traditional fare, all presented with good old Scottish hospitality. To the east of Loch Lomond and over the Bens is the well-documented area, the Trossachs, set amongst the forests of Ardray and Ard. When travelling through this beautiful and rugged scenery, Sir Walter Scott collected his ideas for his literary works of Rob Roy, Lady of the Lake, and Waverley. On the waters of Loch Katrine, there plies the paddle steamer Sir Walter Scott, past Ellen's Isle, named after Ellen Douglas, the Lady of the Lake. The soft, clean, sparkling waters of this loch are collected, then piped through the Campsie Fells to quench the enormous thirst of the city of Glasgow. Over the Duke's Road and past Kilmahog sits Callander, a spa town, with its visitor centre telling tales of local heroes and local history. Amidst the glorious hills and lochs of the Trossachs, a river collects its waters together and starts to flow east, ever towards the North Sea. This is the source of the River Forth. Sitting high upon its crag above the river, Stirling Castle, with impregnable fortifications, commands complete security over all it views. The castle and its town is steeped in the history of battles and plunder. Sir William Wallace defeated the English in 1297 at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Later, he was gallantly followed into the history books by King Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. He and his small army of 8,800 routed King Edward II and his English army of 29,000 men, and barred his way to Stirling Castle to lift the siege. From Stirling Castle's ramparts, we look down the Forth Valley, past the Wallace Monument, and onward to Linlithgow. Set between the loch and the town is the impressive Royal Palace. In this stately building, James V of Scotland and later his daughter Mary Queen of Scots were born. On the first floor in the royal apartments, on the west side of the quadrangle, is the little room where Mary was born, whilst her father, James V, lay dying at Falkland. Now, as we follow the Forth estuary, we pass the bridges that are both comparable feats of engineering in their own right. The rail bridge, opened in 1890, and the road bridge, that took until 1964 to complete. Lying in the shadows of the gigantic steel structures, the sleepy hamlet of South Queensferry, with its tiny harbour and its famous 17th century coaching house, the Hawes Inn, that once played host to scenes from Sir Walter Scott's Antiquary and Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped. Nowadays, the impressive whitewashed Hawes Inn plays host to the traveller who served the best of fare in its family diner, while in its alehouse, beers and whiskies of renown can be enjoyed whilst gazing over the calm of the Firth. On past the islands of Inchcombe with its priory, Inchmickery, and Inchkeith, we approach the port of Leith, the gateway from the sea into Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland. Edinburgh is unsurpassed in what it has to offer. A city of 500,000 inhabitants, it has crammed within its boundaries a multitude of venues in which any visitor can indulge himself. From its old town, built on the backbone of a volcanic crag, to its new town, stretching towards the shores of the Forth. From the ancient castle, high on its rocky outcrop, down its narrow Royal Mile to the Palace of Holyrood. Past historic buildings full of exhibits, and into hostelries filled with locals and tourists alike, exchanging views and telling stories of characters such as Deacon Brodie, a magistrate by day and a criminal robber by night. Was he the possible inspiration for Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde? Also, there can be heard stories of the famous terrier, Greyfriars Bobby, while enjoying a tankard of ale to accompany the banter and the storytelling. The city is full of fine art galleries and museums, such as here in Queen Street, where the Scottish National Portrait Gallery is situated. The finest works of Scottish artists and portraits of famous Scottish dignitaries are displayed to their best advantage in the most magnificent of surroundings. Edinburgh's museums and galleries are complemented by its many fine hotels, restaurants and public houses, all playing their part in making the city worthy of the title Scotland's capital. This short tour of Scotland intends to give a general insight, as well as fond memories of this proud and beautiful country. With a past full of history and romance, and a present well-equipped, Scotland will always give the visitor the best that its people and its heritage has to offer.